We can't lose our hope. That's what fuels us. That's what's kept us going for this long.
It's been 20 years since anyone's seen or heard from Maura Murray, a 21-year-old college student who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Now her family is demanding answers.
Since we don't have any answers and Maura is still missing, it's kind of like we're frozen back then in a way.
That's Julie Murray, Maura's older sister, who's spent the last 2 decades searching for the truth.
Never in a million years did I think I'd be sitting here 20 years later, still without answers.
This month marks the 20th anniversary of Maura's disappearance, when she seemingly vanished into thin air, never to be heard from again. But the case is far from cold. Julie launched a new podcast called Media Pressure, focusing on the intricate details of the case, digging up new information, and hearing from those closest to Maura.
It's time to set the record straight. It's time to give my missing little sister a voice in her own story. Join me as I ask the difficult questions and strive to get closer to resolution in one of the most mysterious missing person cases of our time.
And it's working. The team has already received a new tip about Maura's disappearance as recently as Monday of this week. But Julie says there's still more work to be done.
And so that's just been something that has weighed on my family heavily for 2 decades, because if we could figure out that piece of the puzzle, maybe we could finish the rest of the puzzle.
So here's what we do know. Murray was last seen on February 9th, 2004. She was a junior at the University of Massachusetts Amherst studying nursing. Out of the blue, Murray made a few bizarre choices, like emailing her professors saying a family member died even though no one had. She also made some strange calls and internet searches about both Vermont and New Hampshire.
Then she called a condo owner in Bartlett, New Hampshire to inquire about reservations, but she doesn't book a reservation. After that, she goes to an ATM. She withdraws nearly everything in her account, $280. She goes to a liquor store. She purchases about $40 worth of liquor, and she recycles 79 cans to redeem $3.95, which is an odd thing to do if your plan is to go missing. And so that's an indicator to me that that was never her plan. Then she picked up accident forms that she had in my dad's new car 2 days prior. And then she heads north in her 1996 beat-up black Saturn sedan running on 3 cylinders, destination unknown.
Hours later, just before 7:30 that night, Maura is seen again, this time in the small New Hampshire town of Woodsville, about 2 hours north of her campus. A woman there heard a loud thud outside and noticed a car had crashed. These are the 911 transcripts from that incident. She called dispatch and said, quote, "We apparently have a car has gone off the road here outside our home."
So she places the first 911 call. And a couple minutes later, her neighbor, Butch Atwood, was a bus driver. He was returning home. He passes by the black Saturn. He stops. And he asked the driver if she needed help. And the driver declined and said she had already called AAA. And so then he drove a short distance to his house and places the second 911 call at 7:43. And then minutes later, when the police arrive, the vehicle was locked and abandoned, and Maura was never seen again.
Here's an accident report filed by first responders on the scene. You can see from the drawing, Maura's car made tire impressions into the snow and spun out near some trees, facing the wrong direction of traffic. According to the report, the car was locked when officials arrived, and there was no one in the area. The responding officer wrote, quote, "I spoke to a witness who told me there was a young female behind the wheel and there were no other people in the vehicle. He spoke with a female who told him not to call police. Police, fire, EMS, and a neighbor all searched the area, but Maura was never found." What do you think happened to her?
Well, my best guess is she was probably shaken up from the accident, because we do know that the airbag deployed and that there was a crack in the windshield. So she could have suffered some sort of head trauma. I'm not sure. She could have been drinking. So I think when the bus driver came upon her, maybe she didn't have her plan formulated yet. Or maybe she didn't even know that she didn't have cell phone signal in that area. So she declined the bus driver's help, realized that she's in a very vulnerable situation. It's dark, it's cold, she has no communication, that she accepted the next ride. And I believe she was met with foul play because nothing has ever been found. Her body has never been found, and there have been no credible sightings in 2 decades. I'll just note that that's the worst possible outcome for both Maura and my family. But at this point, 20 years later, we have to live in that reality. And it's hard to do, and it's heart-wrenching to think that that could have happened, but that's what I think happened.
Investigators classify Maura's disappearance as a suspicious missing persons case.
So they haven't ruled out really anything. So everything's still on the table. And they don't really share too much with my family. Our relationship between my family and law enforcement has gotten a lot better since the first few years. And they have shared a bit more information, but they haven't indicated how they're leaning in terms of what they suspect happened.
With the 20th anniversary of her disappearance, the New Hampshire Department of Justice released this photo, a digitally aged picture of what Maura could look like in present day. She would be 41 years old.
Well, thankfully, law enforcement did share that photo with me ahead of its release to the public. So I truly appreciated that, because that would have been very emotional if I had seen it with the rest of the public. But I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I think it was a fairly decent job. I didn't really know what to expect when they told me it was coming. But there have been age progressed photos done in the past that I did not think would look like Maura. So, I mean, it's just another tool. They told me that it's a protocol that they do to start generating new tips and leads.
That's the same reason Julie says she agreed to the podcast. What would cause you to start the podcast now, 2 decades later?
Well, over the past 2 decades, Maura's story has been told by so many other people, and most of those people are strangers. And in all of that coverage, Maura's been kind of lost in her own story. And I was presented with an opportunity from a friend. Her name is Sarah Turney. She is the executive producer of the podcast Media Pressure. And she came up with this idea about giving victims and families a space in true crime to tell their own stories. And so it's a way for us as family members to kind of take the story back and gain some sort of agency over these stories that have just been co-opted by strangers for so long. So I jumped at the opportunity, and it's been amazing. It was definitely emotional to try to get through it, to relive all those details. But at the end of it, my family and everyone that participated just had a big collective sigh of relief, knowing that we finally gave my missing sister Maura a voice in her own story.
Why do you think that this is a case that's attracted so many people?
There's two main reasons. And the first is that Maura is very relatable. She was a young college student. She had her whole life in front of her. She wasn't perfect. She had flaws, and she was struggling in some ways and going through and trying to navigate life. And other people can see themselves in Maura. So that's one. And the other reason is there's so much mystery around Maura's case. Where was she going in the first place? Why didn't she tell anyone? And then, of course, what happened to her? And with so few answers, it's kind of like a storyteller's dream, because you can fill in those gaps with any kind of story that you want to tell, whether it be true or not. And so that's where my family steps in, and we're finally being able to tell this story, share our lived experiences, unfiltered and not having to have it go through somebody else's filter. And this is something that's lacking in true crime. Most content creators just tell these stories and move on to the next one, and sometimes lose sight of the fact that these are real human beings.
Through the podcast, Julie revisits events from Maura's past, including the last time she saw her sister in person.
Little did I know this would be the last time I would ever see my little sister Maura again. In a month's time, she would be ripped away from my life without warning, without reason.
Do you recall the last time that you spoke with her?
Yes, 3:21 on Saturday before she disappeared. And she called me from UMass, and she was car shopping with my dad. And she told me about a couple of the cars that she liked. And that was the last phone call.
Did anything seem suspicious about it? It almost sounds like it was a run-of-the-mill everyday phone call.
That's the thing. I've had a lot of time to think about it over the years. Nothing stood out to me about that phone call.
And Julie says her sister's actions leading up to the disappearance still don't make sense. What do you think was going through Maura's mind? Why would she have headed up to New Hampshire or Vermont? I know there were several places that she researched. Where could she have been going?
Well, that's the big question. That's something we still haven't been able to identify, because if you look at a map, Burlington, Vermont, and Bartlett, New Hampshire, the two places she researched, are very different geographical locations. They're separated by a little over 100 miles and about 2 hours. So it's unclear where she was going, and she didn't tell anybody. And no one's come forward saying, hey, we had this plan to meet up. And so that's just been something that has weighed on my family heavily for 2 decades, because if we could figure out that piece of the puzzle, maybe we could finish the rest of the puzzle.
Maura's ATM withdrawal doesn't add up either.
That part was definitely out of character. She took enough money out of the account and left $16 in there. I think that was so that she didn't completely close the account, so it remained open. But yeah, it wasn't something that she had done before. It doesn't make sense. It still doesn't make sense. And so that's just another layer to this mystery.
The moments the family first learned of Maura's disappearance are all captured on the podcast.
My mind was swimming. I had no idea. What do you mean, missing? Where is she? Nobody knows where Maura is?
Maura's car was found abandoned in the woods in New Hampshire, and she's not there. You don't know where she is. It was surreal. It's hard to describe the feeling of being told that.
My family didn't learn until the day after. So Maura went missing on February 9th, which was a Monday night at 7:30 p.m. And my family wasn't notified until Tuesday, February 10th, early evening. So there was a huge missed opportunity in that window where there were no searches conducted, and my family was totally in the dark. We had no idea. And it's something that, we raised to law enforcement, raised our frustrations over, because for a missing person, it's those critical hours after they go missing where the trail's hot, and that opportunity was missed completely.
Since then, Julie says she's formed a stronger relationship with law enforcement and learned never before released details about her sister's case.
I've been able to establish rapport and trust with them. And I actually had a meeting with both the Assistant Attorney General of the state of New Hampshire, and the lead detective. And they did share a couple of pieces of information with me and asked that I not make it public. And of course, I don't want to jeopardize my sister's investigation, so I will not. But yeah, my family my family does know the most about the information related to my sister's disappearance.
And since the podcast's release, new details have already come to light. Have you learned new things or uncovered new details about the case?
Yes, which was surprising, because having lived it for 20 years, I thought, I knew pretty much everything that there was to know. Of course, law enforcement keeps stuff close to the vest, and I don't know everything that they know. But in researching for the podcast, I came across some files that I had never seen before. And so I'm able to present that new information on the podcast. And finally just tell what it's like to live with long-term ambiguous loss, which is the most difficult type of loss, because it's not like traditional loss where you go through the grieving stages. It's not linear for families of the missing. We kind of go in this cyclical pattern of reliving what happened and trying to figure it out.
Throughout it all, the Murray family hasn't given up hope. Do you and your family have any hope that someone with any sort of information, even all these years later, will come forward and help make a break in the case?
Absolutely. We can't lose our hope. That's what fuels us. That's what's kept us going for this long. And in fact, we got a tip in yesterday, which, is huge, because that's the other motivation behind the podcast, is to keep Maura in the public consciousness in the hopes that it reaches a person that might come forward with information. After all these years, relationships change, loyalties change. Their memory might be jogged by listening to the story, and it's already happening, which is great.
And the family still works to keep Maura's memory alive.
Maura was incredibly gifted, both as an athlete and as a student. She graduated 4th in her class. She got astronomical SAT scores. She was an all-state runner. She made the state meet multiple times. She made nationals. Just super, super motivated, both on the track and in the classroom. But despite her being so accomplished, she was never one to brag. So she was really humble and couldn't take a compliment and was kind. She would write thank you notes, handwritten thank you notes, to anyone that showed her any small gesture of kindness. And that's something that I miss the most about my sister, are those little notes.
Maura's case is still an open investigation. If you have any information about her disappearance, contact the New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.